law and disorder. There is natural law, there is human law. Natural law is law. Human law is deception. Natural law is absolute. To run counter to it is to suffer the immediate consequences. The violator's responsibility for such an action is inescapable. The consequences are certain. Human law is conditional. To run counter to it may be to suffer some consequences at some future date. Consequences are possible. Natural law is objective reality administered by the infinity of consciousness. Human law is subjective unreality administered by searchers after authority. Take stop signs, for instance. How is one to determine if this is a natural law or a human law? If the stop sign law is an example of natural law, every time one runs a stop sign, one's vehicle is in collision with another vehicle. No collision every time? Not natural law. If an accident occurs, the results vary. If one blatantly runs the stop sign at 60 miles per hour, neither looking to the right nor to the left, one would presume that the driver would be killed by the impact of a collision. If one slows to check one direction, but fails to check the other direction, one might presume the impact would only injure the driver. If one checks both ways, but fails to concentrate enough to recognize the danger presented by the approaching vehicle, a collision might result in no injury to the driver, but only damage to the vehicle. If one fails to come to a complete stop, but rolls by the stop sign, the resulting collision could be presumed to be only a scratch on the fender. These examples apportion this driver's degree of irresponsibility at roughly 100%, 75%, 50%, and 25%. Assuming these approximations are fairly accurate, would not it be possible to provide examples for every other percentage, from 99% to 1%? 100 examples reflecting 100 varying shades of irresponsibility. Then could not 100 examples be constructed to represent varying degrees of irresponsibility positioned between each percentage point? 100 between 1% and 2%. Another 100 between 2% and 3%, and so forth. For example, weather conditions regarding precipitation, temperature, lighting and season, type of vehicle, age, and condition of the driver could easily provide the 100 varying conditions applied to each of the 100 actual facts of what occurred. Surely there are 100 degrees of differing light conditions that alone would bear on the accident in one way or another. This would total 10,000 degrees of responsibility for running a stop sign. would that number cover all of the possibilities? Could the possibility exist that every human being on earth could violate a stop sign law, and the degree of responsibility attaching to each would be unique? No two exactly alike. A reasonable individual recognizes that it is possible for a collision to result from running a stop sign. However, it is evident that running a stop sign does not, with certainty, result in a collision. It is here that human law presumes to fill the gap between possibility and certainty. The government exerts its power over the individual, presumably eliminating collisions where stop signs exist. With everyone stopping properly, stop sign intersection collisions are eliminated. Negative possibilities no longer exist, and certainty is achieved. Fortunately, not everyone is deceived. Consciology states that human minds have no comprehension whatever of totality, but instead are confined to contemplation of diversity. Achieving certainty is not available to the human mind. It instead must resign itself to organizing the seemingly endless possibilities. The human law that attempts to bring about certainty to the exclusion of the possibilities is simply deception. One might reasonably question what can be so bad about something that appears to bring order out of chaos. These human laws only place mild restraints on the freedom of individuals. The answer is the same as to any other solution flowing from searchers after authority. The stop sign law is an external solution to an internal problem. In regard to stop sign law, there are two types of people: those who get it and those who don't. There are those who freely choose to comply with the stop sign law. Having considered the question in one's own mind, one freely chooses to honor the order issued by the stop sign. One realizes that not to stop could result in a collision. The solution in this instance is internal, not external. To this individual, the stop sign's external demand does not exist. This individual honors stop signs with one's compliance through one's internal value judgments regarding stop sign protocol. The stop sign law is an external way to advance the appearance of order. The intention to promote order is admirable. To attempt to do so by external means is not. The searcher after authority chooses to ignore the millions of possibilities by jumping to an emotional conclusion without having done the reasoning to support such a leap. Passing a law that requires everyone to stop denies their individuality. Passing a law that requires everyone to stop denies their individuality and declares that everyone is the same. But in fact, everyone is different. The problem with such deception is that it undermines the purpose of life, according to Consciology, which is to expand one's awareness of consciousness. Where does this expansion of awareness occur? Precisely in this gap between possibility and certainty. Precisely the part of the continuum that human law pretends to eliminate. The very existence of human law prevents one from inspecting the possibilities that must be judged by each individual if increased awareness of consciousness is to occur. Human law pretends to bring order. It actually increases disorder. Okay, one might grant, there could be a better way, but this way works all right. The stop sign law bridges the gap between the possibility that an intersection accident will occur and the possibility that no accident will occur. This is done by the searchers after authority. They are willing to transfer their individual power to freely choose to cross intersections using their individual wits. This collective power is transferred to a government that passes a law prohibiting anyone from entering an intersection where a stop sign is installed without stopping and checking traffic in both directions. The existence of such a law is presumed to increase the well-being of all. Does it? Does it benefit the searcher after what is, who took no part in passing the law? The searcher after what is has independently concluded that the idea of stop signs is probably a good idea and usually has no problem in complying with their demands. Does the fact that there is a stop sign backed by a stop sign law, does that ever benefit the searcher after what is? No. Each searcher after what is freely chooses to support the concept of stop signs. The fact that there are consequences for those who do not voluntarily support the stop signs does not come into play as long as the individual freely chooses to comply. But being an individual and acting based upon internal stimuli rather than external law, there will be instances when the stop sign law will negatively impact the searchers after what is. If there are at least as many possibilities regarding stop signs as there are individuals, there must be circumstances where the individual decides it is not proper to stop at the stop sign. A husband discovers at 3 in the morning that his wife has mistakenly ingested a poison, and he is rushing her to the hospital. As he nears a stop sign intersection, instead of reducing his speed, he continues at a speed already above the city speed limit. He needs to turn right, and his vehicle wanders into the left half of the roadway as he approaches the intersection. He has already lowered the car windows to make sure his wife gets as much fresh air as possible to assist her labored breathing. The streets are deserted. Chances are good that if there are any vehicles nearing the intersection when he approaches, that he will be able to hear the hum of another car engine. Hearing no other motor sounds, he speeds through the blind intersection. His speed requires him to make a wide arc on the turn, ending up traveling on the extreme left side of the street into which he has turned. Fortunately, there were no oncoming vehicles or policemen, and he proceeds on to the hospital. He arrives in time for his wife to receive emergency treatment that results in her full recovery. This husband broke the stop sign law. He broke the speed law. He broke the driving on the right side of the road law. He jeopardized his life, the life of his wife, and potentially the lives of other motorists or even pedestrians. He is a searcher after what is. This searcher after what is normally observes stop signs, not because of the law, but because internally his mind has verified the value of stop signs in most circumstances. Laws do not apply in most circumstances. Human laws pretend to be absolute. Human laws require observance in all circumstances. Did this husband break the law? Yes, he did. Did this husband cause an accident? No, he did not. Did this husband get caught? No, he did not. Has this searcher after what is lost anything by the fact that in the eyes of the law he is guilty? Yes, he has. Human law turns his world upside down and makes it impossible to separate right from wrong. By law, he should have taken the time to observe all laws, arrive at the hospital 5 minutes later, exactly 2 minutes after his wife took her last breath. He could take strength from the fact that even though his wife died, he had been faithful to the stop sign law. He knew that by running the stop sign, he could endanger himself, his wife, and others, and he took responsibility for his judgment to proceed at all costs. He took responsibility for his actions and did what to him appeared to be the right thing to do. In the eyes of human law, he was wrong. Thus, even though the law never is a part of this scenario, this searcher after what is diminished by living under human law. Human law states unequivocally that his actions were wrong. He remains certain his actions were right. In an atmosphere where one feels it is necessary to do wrong in the eyes of the law, in order to do right in one's own eyes, can schizophrenia be far behind? The searcher after what is smothered by this human law because it denies one the authority to make the hard decisions that one must make if one is to increase one's awareness of consciousness. Of course, the searcher after authority revels in this limitation of one's responsibility to act upon one's internal value judgments. The searcher after authority wishes to escape these hard decisions and to depend upon the external authority for simple solutions. There is still the judicial side of the law to be considered. Judicial hindsight determines either innocence or guilt and penalty. The judge is a searcher after authority, representing a power created by searchers after authority. Accordingly, individual judgments are consistently identified as running counter to the foundation upon which the searchers after authority depend. Their judgments will be weighted in support of external authority, regardless of the facts presented. Likewise, the penalties administered will fall hardest on searchers after what is. They are identified as major destabilizers of the world the searchers after authority have constructed for themselves. To alter the scenario, let us add a policeman who could have stopped the frantic drive to the hospital. The policeman is cruising down Hospital Drive, moving away from the hospital, when the husband's vehicle is spotted approaching at a high speed. It is making a wide turn onto Hospital Drive, some 8 blocks in front of the approaching police car. Noting the squealing violence of the turn that sent the oncoming vehicle squarely into the path of approaching traffic, had there been any, the policeman determines that he has to turn his vehicle broadside in the road to stop this menace. The husband tries to squeeze between the police car and the curb to continue on his mission, but snags the police car's bumper, landing he, his wife, and the vehicle in a large clump of bushes. This leaves the husband also charged with intent to do bodily harm to a policeman, resisting arrest, and damaging government property. In the trial that follows, the judge is hard-pressed to avoid any appearance that the actions of the policeman contributed to the wife's death. But that is the cornerstone of the defense of the husband, who is a searcher after what is. The judge's duty is clear: to make sure that the cause of the searcher after authority is never presented negatively. An example must be made of this husband, who would put his judgment above the collective traditions of centuries. He is sentenced to jail. So the stop sign law that the husband always honored under normal conditions is not the harmless nuisance it might have appeared to be. 99% of the time and more, this husband consciously supported the stop sign law, and by his own freedom of choice chose to agree with its decree. But complete allegiance to incomplete concepts prevents the consciologist from expanding one's awareness of consciousness. It is the crisis situation that enables the searcher after what is to seize a better awareness of consciousness. The searcher after authority denounces this heroic deed and banishes its author to penal servitude. The crime is not running a stop sign. The crime is not even evading arrest or causing damage to government property. The crime that lands this husband in jail is the crime of political incorrectness. It is not politically correct to make individual judgments on themes that governments have banned. Government has already made the definitive judgment in the form of the stop sign law. The law asserts as certainty that failure to stop will result in a collision. To consider that further possibilities might exist is to be in contempt. And to act out this fantasy is to subject oneself to confinement while one reconsiders the error of one's ways. In theory, penitentiaries are for penitents. Since this husband, searcher after what is remorseless, the judge is remorseless regarding the husband's penalty. Opposed as they usually are, searchers after authority and searchers after what is do have something in common. They are both searchers. The search of the searcher after what is an honest search, an open-minded search for answers, whatever they might be, wherever the search might lead. The search of the searcher after authority is not an honest search. The search continues as long as it does not lead one to certain areas that have been forbidden from the outset. Fear dictates these forbidden areas, and it takes courage to overcome the fear that fosters these restrictions. Unfortunately, for the searcher after authority, it is precisely these forbidden areas that prevent their search from reaching a successful conclusion. Fear prevents an honest search and mandates failure. Is this husband guilty of the crime for which he has been sentenced? First, with regard to guilt, is he guilty of the actions with which he is charged? Yes, he is. Second, with regard to punishment, are these actions that deserve confinement? No, they are not. Is guilt individual or collective? First, is the individual husband guilty? Yes, he is. Second, does anyone else share in his guilt? No, they do not. Then how does this judge get in the picture? Is the judge assuming all or part of the guilt? No, the judge is not. The judge is part of the fantasy that pretends to delete the area between possibility and certainty. In regard to the stop sign violation, the judge will pretend that the possibility of a collision is a certainty, that a collision occurred at the stop sign intersection, which in fact did not happen. The charade is justified by pretending to protect those who are potentially the victims of this husband in the accident that did not happen. Is the judge considering the circumstances after the fact or after the fiction? The searcher after authority will go to any length to defend the authoritarian position, since the alternative of individual responsibility is so hideously unbearable. This husband, searcher after what is, acknowledges individual responsibility for his actions. He strained his hearing to its limit, trying to turn without endangering himself, his wife, or others. If his judgment had been in error, he had auto insurance that was supposed to provide monetary compensation for whatever errors he might make while driving. He has done all he could do to fulfill his individual responsibility in this very unusual crisis situation. Not so, say the searchers after authority. It is impossible for this husband to shoulder his individual responsibility for his actions. In their mellowest, paternalistic tones, the searchers after authority will recite the catechism of how the unworthy and the unanointed cannot assume the mantle of authority. This husband's arrogance reveals an inner sickness that can only be cured by jail time. We cannot permit this individual usurpation of power. Power must be reserved for the authorities, who will protect us from the disease of individual responsibility. So this husband who has sinned against the stop sign spends time behind bars. This is government's version of the religious tactic of ostracism. The government version runs a very distant second to the precision that the religious version can achieve. To the extent that the religious adherents support the ostracism, religious ostracism approaches the perfection of natural law. The ostracized individual literally becomes a non-person. One's friends, one's family, and strangers alike do not recognize that one exists. There are no dealings with others. There is no acknowledgement that one's presence is detected. One's money is not accepted. Eventually, one is banished outside the confines of where one might be expected to survive at all, without companionship, shelter, or food. Ostracism, administered by government, is presumed to be more merciful. It includes shelter and food, but social interaction is severely curtailed. This is presumed to produce a contemplative state that will in time bring one to recognize the error of one's ways and to head one toward a new beginning when released back into society. Like the rest of society, jail society is composed of searchers after authority and searchers after what is. The searcher after authority develops through two stages. In the first stage, the search after authority is genuinely seeking these authority figures and believes that such figures are possible and that finding them will bring the search to a successful conclusion. In the second stage, the searcher after authority recognizes that no outside authority figure can satisfy the need one experiences for a sense of direction in one's life. Even after this revelation of the hopelessness of this quest, the searcher after authority continues to deny the validity of any inner quest. Instead, this searcher after authority attempts to assume the personage of the sought-after authority by becoming a part of the entourage of government, religion, or a gangster authority. While no longer believing in the search, one attempts to masquerade as the object of the search. Obviously, jail populations lend themselves most readily to searchers after authority, particularly those involved in gangs, and to a lesser extent, those involved in governments. To be incarcerated is to be subjected to a crash course in these philosophies. The error that lands the searcher after authority in jail is a boundary dispute. Boundaries between the searchers after authority and others, and between one's possessions and those of others, are responsibilities abdicated to outside authorities. Since few internal boundaries exist, these boundary disputes are a constant source of conflict that can result in jail time for the searcher after authority. The error that lands the searcher after what is in jail is heresy. The searcher after what is has been a searcher after authority who has discovered that the search is an internal search and that the prize is not to be found external to oneself. This means one must attempt to define for oneself those areas of thought that the authorities have placed off limits to individuals. The stop sign law prohibits action based upon individual thought, presuming to bring order to the area between the possibility that a collision will occur and the certainty that a collision will occur, is in the sole possession of the authority, which in this instance is government. Defining this area between possibility and certainty is done after the fact by judges and juries. Before examining what is or is not accomplished by these devices, authored by searchers after authority, certain conclusions can be drawn from the outset. First, the gap between possibility and certainty is not going to be bridged, because certainty is an infinite concept that is being considered by finite human beings. Consciology affirms that consciousness is unlimited, one's awareness of consciousness is limited. Consciousness is complete, one's awareness of consciousness is incomplete. Consciousness is perfect, one's awareness of consciousness is imperfect. Certainty is not going to be achieved by imperfect human beings or by any combination of one who is called a judge plus 12 other human beings acting as a jury. While it may not be perfect, the apologists admit and then proudly boast, but it's the best system ever devised by man. The purpose of life, according to the Consciologist, is to expand one's awareness of consciousness. A corollary would appear to be that anything blocking this expansion of one's awareness of consciousness would be thwarting the purpose of living. When it is admitted that this system is not perfect, the next question should be, does the system permit the perfecting process to continue? Unfortunately, the answer to that question is no, it does not. Governments are structures erected to facilitate the search after authority. This external search for what can only be solved by an internal solution strictly prohibits any consideration that an internal solution could be possible. How strictly? Well, this husband is going to spend time in jail for acting on his internal judgment. Is this as tough as it gets? Not even close. The government has no qualms about carrying out a death sentence on a searcher after what is, whose influence has infected a large enough group. Then it becomes expedient to make an example of the intransigent. The government of the searcher after authority presumes to transform possibility into certainty by means outside of the individual. Since the road that one must travel to approach nearer to this certainty is actually located within the individual, government might appear to be a roadblock. Government is not a roadblock, it is a detour. The billboards are many and dazzling that promote this fork in the road. But when the searcher after what is becomes sufficiently convinced of the correctness of the choice, the extravagant claims no longer deter one from proceeding toward increased individual responsibility. This husband accepted his individual responsibility for choosing to ignore the stop sign law in the crisis condition in which he found himself. He is a limited human being. He did not create the circumstances that brought him to this fate. He acted according to his best judgment, in the best interest of himself, in the best interest of his wife, and in the best interest of all others who might be involved. Nevertheless, he is guilty as charged. The pride of this Lucifer spirit has in this one small aspect of his life dared to assume the role of the authority. He has chosen individual value judgment and defied the group mores. One small voice proclaims that the road from possibility to certainty does not pass through authoritarian pronouncements. It is not hard to understand the appeal of the searcher after authority. Given a choice, everyone would choose to understand totality, not diversity. Given a choice, everyone would choose certainty over possibility. In the condition of freedom in which the Lucifer spirit finds oneself, freedom is presumed to be unlimited. In fact, the available choices are not between possibility and certainty. The freedom of choice is among possibilities. Millions of possibilities. Unlimited possibilities. Consciology recognizes that human minds have no comprehension whatever of totality, but instead are confined to contemplation of diversity. This can be such a depressing realization that it can spawn a frantic search for an alternate solution. The search after authority is a label that attempts to group the major forms this depression assumes. If the search after authority fails to succeed in producing this outside authority, what alternative does this searcher have? First, if this quick fix won't work, one's situation is many times worse than one had wanted to admit. Not only is certainty not even a possibility in the foreseeable future, the task of making individual judgments on millions of possibilities is daunting, to say the least. Second, if the major efforts of most of 3,000 years of history amount to a detour in the realization of consciousness, how is one ever to catch up? The first concern regarding a formidable task is a valid concern. The second concern, for the time to catch up, is not a valid concern. This is not a timed test. In fact, in the wide scope terms of this search, time does not exist. One's only concern is getting the right answer. The sooner one determines the right answer to any of life's problems, the sooner one no longer suffers the consequences of that error. The search involves only what is, never when. What will become of this husband who has become a tragic figure imprisoned for trying to do the right thing? Nothing good, is the reflex reply. Like any situation, the individual can make the most or the least of any circumstance. But imprisonment is unalterably a negative condition that tends to create negative consequences. Prisons are the end result of the aspiration of the searchers after authority to make human law imitate natural law. Any close inspection of life behind bars will always leave one shouting the inevitable question: how could anyone muster the amount of hatred for one's fellow human beings enormous enough to sanction treating them in such a shameless fashion? The source of this hatred cannot be understood without recognizing that becoming a searcher after authority is a dishonest act. The searcher after authority has traded animal instinct for human self-consciousness. This act exchanges external control by instinct for internal control and individual responsibility. But the searcher after authority wants to renege on the deal by returning to an instinctive, externally controlled existence. The searcher after authority knows it is not possible to regress to an animal state, but fear renders one unable to face the task of evolving into a responsible individual. Instead, one becomes addicted to a desperate search for what knows cannot be. It is this addictive behavior that explains the inhuman rage. One surrenders oneself to the savage beast of one's primal instincts. There is apparently no boundary that the addictive behavior will not cross to satisfy the addiction. The pathology of addiction may appear to be a demonic possession, but regardless of appearances, this human being remains a human being. This is evident because regardless of how much the individual might wish to renounce self-consciousness, there is no going back. There is no way to unknow what one knows. Fear of assuming individual responsibility can lead one to wish for the lost paradise of instinct. This fear animates the searcher after authority. The possibility of a cure to addictive behavior occurs only when the individual hits bottom. The addictive behavior demands an action of this individual so far beneath the individual's inner judgment of oneself that the individual is forced to assert, "No, I won't do that," regardless of the consequences. There is a point in the scale of treachery below which the individual refuses to function. Another individual's shame quotient might descend even further. But these precepts of Consciology endure. Consciousness is unlimited. One's awareness of consciousness is limited. Consciousness is complete. One's awareness of consciousness is incomplete. Consciousness is perfect. One's awareness of consciousness is imperfect. One might lament the limited, the incomplete, and the imperfect because they appear to bar any hope of becoming absolute. But if they appear to limit one's future, the limit applies equally to one's past. One cannot reach perfection in the foreseeable future. Likewise, one cannot regress to an animal existence. Human we are, and human we shall remain for the foreseeable future. No better and no worse. Human beings recognize that individuals belong on this scale, stretching from being to nothingness, and that nothingness does not relate to the human condition. The individual's awareness of consciousness is superior to that of the animal instinct. This is a fact, even though many have difficulty mustering the courage necessary to overcome one's fear of the individual responsibility that it requires. The addictive behavior hits bottom when, regardless of the consequences, the individual chooses not to function below a certain point. This has been described as a let go and let God experience. Actually, it is a profound declaration of I am. It is an experience of a floor of awareness below which the individual cannot sink. The individual acknowledges this event as the birth of one's personal awareness of one's self-consciousness, much as Paul's revelation on the road to Damascus. A limit is discovered to the addictive behavior that had been perceived to be unlimited in its downside. That delimiting factor is the self-conscious will of the individual. It is of minor consequence at what depth this insight occurs. What is important is that the addictive behavior that had previously been perceived as all-powerful is recognized as being limited. This discovery of this limit creates a rebirth for the individual. The individual gains very personal knowledge that one's existence is unique and that from this point forward everything is upward and nothing can ever bring the individual to this depth of despair again. However, the searcher after authority may simply change to an addictive behavior that is more socially acceptable. one that continues to shield one from much of the intensity of individual responsibility. One example would be a change from alcoholism to religion. Regardless, the inordinate rage that the searcher after authority carries stems from the fear that the basic dishonesty of the search will be revealed. The horror of prisons is just one consequence of this deception. If the gap between possibility and certainty cannot be bridged by human law, cannot human law nevertheless be beneficial? Such questions cannot be answered without first asking another question. Compared to what? Yes, the rule of law is superior to the rule of an autocrat, but this does not help to answer the question unless one compares it to all of the different forms of government that searchers after authority have devised over the centuries. The key would be how far removed from each unique individual is the seat of power. The autocratic rule places all power in one individual. For the sake of simplicity, let's assume 1 million subjects. If one has power over 1 million, the ratio of those in power to those out of power is 1 in 1 million. The United States Constitution represents that most highly evolved example of the rule of law. It divides power among 3 branches of government. This is called a limited government. It is not. Each branch may be limited, but the total of the 3 branches is all powerful, just like the autocrat. It is just a bit more cumbersome to control. The executive branch's power rests in one individual, the president. The legislative branch's power rests in the Senate and House of Representatives, totaling less than 600 individuals. The judicial branch's power rests in separate judges and juries. Their decision may be appealed to higher courts until the extreme case might divide power among up to some 50 individuals in the judicial branch. Thus, if the U.S. had a population of 1 million, the ratio of power could be as high as nearly 700 to 1 million, instead of the autocrat's 1 to 1 million. Nearly 700 times better, but is it good enough? America is said to have a form of representative self-government. This noble-sounding half-truth is a euphemism for this variety of autocratic rule. But the term is a fascinating one because it corrupts a self-evident fact that all would affirm. Not representative self-government, but simply self-government is the ultimate form of government.